Come on in and grab a seat. We're about to get started. Thank you everyone for being here and welcome to the 2017 McGovern Civic Engagement Forum. My name is Carly Hubers and I'm the program coordinator at the McGovern Center here at DWU. On behalf of the McGovern Center, of KORN News Radio, and of Dakota Wesleyan, we'd like to welcome you all and our speakers to tonight's event. The McGovern Civic Engagement Forum seeks to follow the legacy of George and Eleanor McGovern by providing a space for engaging, civil, and educational dialogue. Our hope is to encourage students to become thoughtful, engaged, local, and global citizens. This year, the Civic Engagement Forum is part of DWU's Speaker Series. Speakers who are a part of this series are encouraged to answer in some way this year's Speaker Series theme: what makes a nation great? Tonight, we have invited 3 of our South Dakota gubernatorial candidates and 3 of our South Dakota congressional candidates to share with us their answer to the question, what makes a nation great? After each candidate shares their answer with us for about 5 minutes or so, there will be a time of questions led by a panel of our DWU students and facilitator JP Skelly from KORN News Radio. During this portion, not all the candidates will be required to answer every question, but if a candidate does decide to answer a question, they will receive about 1 or 2 minutes to answer this as they please. And we ask that you please hold your applause during this time until the end of the forum so that we can have time to hear from as many candidates as possible. After the time of questions, there will be an open reception where each of you can meet and greet with the candidates who are here tonight. We hope that you will stick around after for the reception time. And thank you again for being here. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Alicia Vincent, our McGovern Center Director, to introduce tonight's speakers.
Thanks, Carly. I'm going to introduce tonight's speakers to you. First, the candidates running for U.S. House of Representatives. Dusty Johnson. Dusty Johnson grew up in the Fort Pierre area and attended USD for his bachelor's degree. He received a graduate degree from the University of Kansas as well. He won the election for Public Utilities Commissioner in 2004, where he served until 2010 when he joined state government as Governor Dugard's Chief of Staff. He spent the last few years working here in Mitchell as Vice President of Vantage Point Solutions, a telecommunications, engineering, and consulting firm. He and his wife, Jackley, have 3 sons. Shantel Krebs. Shantel grew up in Arlington, but now resides in Fort Pierre, where she serves as the Secretary of State for South Dakota. She graduated from Dakota State with a business degree and owned 2 small businesses in Sioux Falls. She went on to serve in the South Dakota House of Representatives and the Senate from 2005 until 2015. Tim Bjorkman. Tim is a 5th-generation South Dakotan who grew up in Kimball. I was a Chamberlain Cub, so Kimball was our high school rival. He attended SDSU and USD, graduating from law school in 1982. He spent 23 years as an attorney in Bridgewater and was appointed by South Dakota's Chief Justice to serve on the state's pardons and paroles. Tim was also elected to the First Circuit Court in 2006 and served there until June of 2017. Tim and his wife Kay also have 4 sons. And now the candidates running for governor. Terry LaFleur. Terry is a 1997 graduate of the University of South Dakota and a 2002 graduate of Thomas M. Cooley School of Law in Michigan. Terry resides in Minnehaha County and is running as a Republican candidate for governor of South Dakota. Lora Hubbel. In 2014, Lora was the first woman to run for governor in South Dakota. She is from Sioux Falls and is the former chair of the Minnehaha County Republican Party. She was also elected to the South Dakota House of Representatives in 2010. Marty Jackley. Marty Jackley currently serves as the Attorney General of South Dakota and is a GOP candidate for governor. Jackley received an electrical engineering degree from SDS, South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, and a law degree from USD. He worked in the U.S. Federal District Court, was confirmed by the U.S. Senate as the United States Attorney for South Dakota, and he also served as the chairman of the nation's attorney generals. Marty lives in Pierre with his wife and 2 children. We also invited Billy Sutton and Christy Nome, also running for governor, to tonight's forum, and both declined our invitation. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate all of you and your commitment to civic engagement to the state of South Dakota. We look forward to hearing your responses tonight.
And before we begin tonight, I want to introduce our student panel who played a really major role in putting this program together. I'll ask them to stand. Nathan Bader. Nathan is from Pierre. He's a sophomore majoring in history and nonprofit administration with a minor in international affairs. He's the vice president of the McGovern Engagement Group and parliamentarian on the Dakota Wesleyan Student Senate, as well as a McGovern scholar. Rachel Parsons. Rachel Parsons is a junior from Milesville, South Dakota. She's majoring in English and history and minoring in religious studies. Rachel is a member of Third Freedom, Student Ministry Council, and the McGovern Engagement Group. Amy Zeller. Amy Zeller is a 4th-year student here at DWU. She's the 2014 George McGovern Scholar and has worked with the McGovern Center on various food insecurity initiatives, including serving as the current university's Fighting World Hunger president. She also loves to travel and has visited 5 countries since her first year on campus. She's majoring in nonprofit administration and minoring in criminal justice and international development. Cece Schneider. Cece Schneider is a nonprofit administration and psychology major. She was born and raised in Sioux Falls. This is her 3rd year as the McGovern Engagement Group president, and she also serves as the president of the DWU Student Senate. A round of applause for our student coordinators. And now we will begin with our candidates to answer the question, what makes a nation great? You'll have 5 minutes, and Cece is our timer. And we will begin with Dusty Johnson.
So I am going to probably get myself in a little bit of trouble here with Carly and Dr. Vincent, in that I'm not going to answer the question they asked, at least not very much. I am Dusty Johnson. I live in Mitchell. And the question was, what makes a country great? And I think that's kind of boring. I think a great country protects the freedoms and the rights of its people, and they keep them safe and secure. I think a far more interesting question is, what makes this country great? And I want to share just a few experiences from my life to tell you what I think the top 3 things are that make America great. Have any of you ever done any international mission work? By show of hands, anybody ever gone? It's really, really incredible. And if you haven't done it, you should contact Dr. Vincent or somebody else to go do it. It for most people, is a life-changing experience. And that was certainly the case for me. I went to Haiti, and this is the poorest country in our hemisphere, and you can tell it. The second you land in the airport at Port-au-Prince, you can tell that you have left the shores of America. And they don't mean to be rude at all. I mean, the Haitian people are incredibly friendly, but they have a very different sense of the rule of law than we do. All right, I want you to imagine yourself at county fair. You're in line to get groceries, and another checker comes and opens up another line, right? What happens? Is there a mad scramble with people pushing and shoving to get into that line? No. It's just amazing. The rule of law is so strong that we let the people toward the front of the line self-select into this other line, and then those of us further back sort of make our choices after that. And that is, I don't want to call it a quintessentially American thing, but it is something that is stronger in this country than you will find almost anywhere else. And it is something we take for granted a great deal. The second thing I would mention is the pursuit of happiness. We do take this for granted in this country, or at least we used to. Now you will have lots of people talk about how there isn't income mobility in this country, and certainly income mobility has decreased, and it's something we need to be concerned about, but it's still the case that half the people in the Fortune 500 Billionaires Club are self-made, It is still the case that 83% of Americans born into the poorest quadrant in this country will out-earn their parents, most of them substantially so. I came from a working class family. There were 7 of us, and there were many months, maybe most months, when my parents didn't feel like there was quite enough to go around. And yet I knew, from day one, I knew from instructions my parents gave and from others in my community, that a lot of hard work would allow me to rise above that station. And that has been the case. And it isn't the case for everyone, and it's not a universal cure to what ails this country, but it is still the case that hard work is an incredibly strong predictor of where you're going to end up in life. And that is, I think, an essential element of what makes America great. The third thing, the final thing I would mention, is the fact that America has traditionally not been bashful about sharing our thoughts on freedom and values and democracy. I mean, we are number one in our ability to spread democracy and freedom across the world, and I don't even know who number 2 is. Americans have understood since our earliest days that a representative republic was something special. This idea of power being embodied in the people, and then in the states as individual entities in our Constitution. Not that states are subservient to the federal government, but in fact they came together to form it. Those are the sorts of philosophical beliefs and underpinnings that you just don't find everywhere. I want to thank you all for being willing to welcome us here tonight. Mitchell has been my home for 15 or 16 years now. I'm a former adjunct professor of this campus. I think it's a fantastic asset, not just to the city, but to our entire state. And I look forward to the opportunity to answer your questions. Thanks so much.
Next is Shantel Krebs. Shantel, please.
Good evening. We are not a democracy. So when you ask the question, what makes a nation great? The answer is not that because we are a democracy, which most individuals may think so. Our country is a republic form of government. A republic form of government. And our rights, they're not granted to us by a government, but by a God. In the United States, our form of government is a constitutional republic, specifically. A republic that has its ideals in some type of charter or a constitution in which those rights are defined, and what we call inalienable rights. Those rights, what we call inalienable rights, are the rights that God's word has actually provided the basis for what we term inalienable rights. And I'm going to explain those. Those are inalienable rights, or rights bestowed by God on every individual, regardless of race, gender, or social status. Among these, let's give some examples of inalienable rights. Some of them are life, liberty, property, due process, religious freedom, the sanctity of home, as well as all sorts of other rights that have been defined in our formation documents, such as our Declaration of Independence, and continued on into our Bill of Rights. That's what defines a nation, our nation, as a republic form of government. Now, let's go further into that and say our founding document specifically says and directly acknowledges that God gave these rights to men. Specifically, it states, all men are created and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. So the purpose of government, the purpose of your government is to protect these rights. That's what the purpose of your government does, is to protect those inalienable rights that have been bestowed onto us by our God and defined in our founding document as such. Now, rights can't be taken away from government either, because even if it's been elected by a majority, say the majority says we want to change this process, those rights, those inalienable rights that have been defined cannot be taken away from you by our government. Now, in a pure democracy, The majority, they're not restrained. They can essentially overrule and take over the will and their will in the minority or to the minority. That's a democracy. Somebody told me earlier today, and we were talking about this, and they said, you know, really, democracy is two wolves and a lamb deciding what's going to be for supper. That's a democracy. Our country is not a democracy form of government. It's a republic form of a government. So our nation depends on you. It depends on our citizens. It depends on our citizens who care enough about preserving it to really evaluate the people who run for office, evaluating us, deciding, are these people effective at what they say they are? Are they going to demonstrate wisdom? Are they going to demonstrate restraint? Are they going to demonstrate personal virtue? Most of all, it requires citizens to have the wisdom and the courage to stand up and move forward against your government and take action when their government becomes overstepping their bounds. If your government oversteps their bounds, and if you feel that they've done so, your job as a citizen is to step up and take action against that government that has overstepped those boundaries that you have defined. Now, I want to tell you a little bit, as Secretary of State, I get to oversee the elections, and I get to see this in action. What we have in South Dakota and every state in the nation are fair and free elections, where a lot can be determined at the ballot box. And I want to share with you some numbers. As your Secretary of State, we see that the 18 to 30-year-old category is registered in high numbers. There's about 104,000 of you in that category that are registered in South Dakota. So congratulations for being registered to vote. Now, in the 2014 midterm election, November of 2014, only 20% of that 105,000 showed up at the polls to vote. 1 in 5 of you. Let's just take your group right now. If you're 18 to 30, 1 in 5 showed up at the polls. So what I'm going to summarize is saying, what makes a great nation great? Educate yourselves. Educate yourselves amongst and with your people that are running for office. Get involved in government, and then take action. And lastly, stand up if you see something that is not acceptable.
Next, Timothy Bjorkman.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow candidates, good evening, everyone. It's the honor of Kay, my wife, who's here tonight, and I to be with you in Mitchell once again. I served here for a little over a decade on the bench and have a lot of friends and a lot of connections back here, and it's always good to be in Mitchell. A European observer once called America a nation with the soul of a church. He meant that the United States didn't unite around the same ethnic background, but instead upon a desire to make a nation out of vagabonds and exiles, united only by shared political ideals. Thomas Jefferson summed up those ideals in the Declaration of Independence that you've heard touched on. But in this document, at its very core are these truths: that each person is endowed not by government, but by the Creator, with rights that government cannot take away. Among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That last one, stated another way, is the right of each child to reach as far in life as her natural ability and her determination will take her, without regard to the circumstances of her birth or who her parents are. It is the right to a fair shot at the American dream. It's these ideals that make America great. So, those who say America is no longer great, or needs to be made great again reveal a fundamental lack of understanding of the nature of her greatness. The real question for each of us who seek to lead our state or serve our state is this: will you ensure these founding ideals are made real in the life of each American boy and girl? That's it. That sums it up. Today, we aren't doing a very good job of protecting vulnerable young life on either side of the birth process. We abort roughly 900,000 preborn every year, and less known is that an estimated 2 million American children are subjected to harm by adult caregivers every single year. The scars of childhood abuse remain visible in the lives of millions of American adults who struggle with poor life outcomes, poor parenting skills, and find themselves at high rates in the criminal justice system. Many of them I had to sentence. In fact, I am convinced that our failure to protect and care for vulnerable young life is at the root of many of the deepest problems that plague America today. And no elected official even talks about it. Until, as a nation, we address this fundamental failure and work toward common sense solutions, we won't live up to the promise of our founding ideals. President Ronald Reagan, in his first inaugural address, said this: "How can we love our country and not love our countrymen? And loving them, not reach out a hand when they fall, heal them when they're sick, and provide opportunity to make them self-sufficient so that they are equal in fact and not just in theory." The reality is that today we have leadership in both political parties who are failing us. It's time for us to tune out the din of the hate talkers and the finger pointers and remember who we are as Americans, that we're on the same team, that we share the same basic desires for our country.
Time.
Thank you all for listening, because how we fulfill these responsibilities will determine the kind of America that we leave our children and grandchildren.
Next, Mr. Terry LaFleur.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow South Dakotans. It's an honor and a privilege to be here this evening with you. Carly sent this question over to me, and I have been pondering it since I received it. The question is, what makes a nation great? I've given it quite a bit of thought, and I believe that any nation can be a great nation. It doesn't matter how big or how small the nation is. For example, China is definitely a very large nation. I think we could all agree on that. But China is never going to be a great nation. In order to be a great nation, you have to recognize civil liberties. You have to recognize that people have dignity and respect coming to them. And a great nation, those are two requisites that a great nation must have in order to become a great nation. Israel, on the other hand, is a very small nation, and I think we would agree on that too. But Israel is a great nation. They're very creative. They're the holy land of technology. ICQ came from Israel. Militarily, they're a first world power, just like China and the United States. They're also, and I say this loosely, they also are a democratic form of government, just like we are in many ways. We're also a republic. A nation, like a man or a woman, can be great if they are generous, if they have ideas that can change the world or to make a difference. What makes a nation great is its ability to work together in a diverse society for the good of all of its people. After all, a nation is nothing more than a collection of people living within sovereign borders. And therefore, they can be measured by their contributions to the world as a whole and also to all of mankind in areas such as science and medicine and the arts and technology. Unfortunately, a great nation, it is also greatest at its time of war and conflict. But why is this necessarily true? It's true because in times of conflict, we all come together as one people. And we try to work and overcome our adversaries and all of our challenges that we're facing on a day-to-day basis. An example is 9/11. Osama bin Laden never dreamed that we would come after him like we did, but he was wrong. There were more American flags flying after 9/11 than on most prior 4th of July weekends in this country. Our strengths and our weaknesses tell us who we are. Mao returned China to the Dark Ages, and Obama returned America to the pre-1960 era with racism and violence against our police. I was born in 1955, and I have never witnessed the social turmoil in our own people than I have lately, and I hope I never see it again. The separations of powers and the Constitution make America a beacon for other nations to strive for. All the guns and military might mean nothing but for the civil liberties that the Constitution so eloquently codifies for all of us. Have we made great contributions to the world? Undoubtedly. Post-World War II, we saw a shattered Europe, and through the McCarthy Plan, we helped to rebuild Europe. America even rebuilt Japan, a country that deceived and attacked us on December 7th of 1941, a day that went down in our history books as a day of infamy. America did not achieve freedom, liberty, and human rights without working together for the good of all Americans. Our nation's greatness and contributions are unquestionable. However, what I see as the most critical ingredient to make a nation great is in its ability to come together on one united front with one voice and say, we must all work together if we intend to accomplish anything we're doing in life. That's what makes a nation great. It's working together as one voice and one party. It's not too late to back up from that abyss, ladies and gentlemen. If we work as hard as we do in times of war and conflict, we can all achieve success. And we can succeed where others have failed. America is the right system, and America has the right stuff. And America can heal and also correct itself through hard work.
Time. And next, please welcome Lora Hubbel.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay, good. I have allergies, so if I cough up here, I'm not contagious. Okay, I'm just coughing. Okay. First of all, I love you guys' age. I love your antics. I love your desire. I even love your orneriness. I was a teacher, taught your age, taught them nursing science. I have a 4-year degree in biology and another degree in nursing. So I do understand, what you guys are going through. My mother was also a professor at USD, so we love education in our family, and I'm glad to see that you are bettering yourselves and going to take this world by storm. And I appreciate you being here tonight, especially to hear, because we're not really your age anymore, but we're trying to do our best. I hope someday you guys will kind of return the favor and help us also by running for office. Age, you have these glass problems here. One of the things that the great nation comes about has to be by its foundation. And I'm actually going to take the question a little bit on a different direction, because I know America is a great nation, and because of our founding documents, I believe, we can say because we have this contract, we are able to be what we want to be. You have the ability to determine your own destiny. A lot of people in a lot of nations can't do that. If their father was a shoemaker, they have to be a shoemaker. You can determine your own destiny. Don't let that ever escape from you. Don't settle for when somebody tells you, you have to be this, you have to be this, you have to go a certain path. Resist that. Make sure that you are always the master of your own destiny, because there are those who want to take that from you. South Dakota mirrors a great nation. South Dakota basically is kind of a sovereign nation, so to speak. A governor is kind of like the president. And so our South Dakota documents mirror, I believe, our great nation's documents. Anybody been in Pierre? Have you been in the Capitol? Oh, thank you. Most of you guys have. That's wonderful. I'm glad you have. Now, when you're in Pierre, I do have on my table back there, this is not advertising or campaign material. It's just purely educational. So I want you to take a piece of it and to see how great our Capitol actually is. In our Capitol, there are 4 murals. One is in the Senate. It's called the Louisiana Purchase. And one of the reasons why the Louisiana Purchase was a strong point in South Dakota was because it actually allowed for more trade. You can see that depicted in the picture, but it also allowed for evangelizing the New West. Sorry about that. The New West that was happening. You guys, Dusty asked if you guys had ever done mission work. South Dakota was actually a missionary work in process, as was America. America was established as a missionary escapade. Now, in the Louisiana Purchase picture, we see that one of the ladies is carrying a Bible. So evidently that was important in establishing, our documents. Another big, huge, beautiful painting is in the House of Representatives, and the name of that is The Peace That Passes Understanding. Now, many of you will recognize that is a Bible verse. It comes from Philippians 4:7, meaning that, God gives us peace when we don't think we can have peace on our own. Now, our founding South Dakota fathers wanted us to know that so much that there is a huge picture right in the House of Representatives that depict that. Another one of the beautiful murals is in the Supreme Court, and it's actually called The Mercy of the Law. A lot of people will say, I'm a strict authoritarian for the law. That's not how the law in our courts were designed. We have the law, as what's written with the legislature. We have the courts for mercy. I know a judge can sit up there and say, I know what the law is, but I can depict or give you mercy if I want to. And I hope we never forget that. That is part of our South Dakota heritage also. And you'll notice in that picture, there's a picture of the 10 Commandments there. So you can see our Judeo-Christian background. Another picture is in the governor's office and is closed up now. Yeah, we do censor things in South Dakota. We have a picture censored in the governor's office. It's called The Spirit of the West, and it shows a woman carrying a Bible. And they don't like that, so that one has been shut down. I want you to notice the next time you're at Pier, the door handles at every single door. What do you think it says? It says, under God, the people rule. So our founding fathers wanted to know every time we touched the door in Pier, we knew that we were not making the rules. We were under rules ourselves, and we were to give that liberty and that freedom to others. Thank you, and I do appreciate you coming out on a night like this.
And next, Marty Jackley.
Good evening. I want to especially thank the candidates and the governor candidates, Terry and Lora, for being here tonight. I think it's great that we get to have this good conversation about how to make South Dakota better and the different things that we enjoy. When you look at the question, what makes a nation great, I think it really comes down to the freedoms that we have and enjoy and the opportunities that we get. And when you think of that, it really boils down to two. We get all of this as a nation here in the United States because of our veterans, because of our military service, as we've seen lately because of the work of our first responders, the tragic loss of Chief Donnie and Presho, what the first responders are doing in Las Vegas. So when it comes to those freedoms and opportunities, I know we probably have some veterans and some first responders here. Would you wave or stand up so we can give you a round of applause? Thank you. When you talk of freedom, what better a nation that allows us to gather like we do today with that freedom to assemble? And that freedom, if you disagree with something I say tonight, to tell me that. Or that freedom under the Second Amendment that I got to enjoy with my daughter Isabella last Sunday on a father-daughter pheasant hunt when she's 11 years old and I can go out and enjoy that. Or the fact that an attorney general can stand in front of you and you know you have that freedom to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. And I think those are very valuable freedoms and very important in what really makes us and makes a great nation. And when you talk about opportunity, you know, I'm walking opportunity. Who would have thought a young boy from Sturgis High School would be U.S. Attorney at age 35, get to be Attorney General, and get to lead the nation's Attorney Generals? And there's a lot of opportunity that comes with education. I know that education isn't always the most necessary thing, but it's something that I look back, it made the pathway for me. I had my mother as my accounting teacher in high school. I had an opportunity to go to engineering school and on to law school. And as I stand here in Mitchell, it's especially important to recognize we're at Dakota Wesleyan, you've got Mitchell Tech. We have huge opportunities in our state and across the nation, and it's really that opportunity to create the ability to succeed if you choose and work hard. And I look out in the audience and I see a lot of young people, which I think other candidates have mentioned makes us feel great. I mean, because you are our future. This is important enough on an evening to be here to talk about the issues that are important to a nation and to South Dakota. I mean, you really have that opportunity, like I've got to do, is to dream. And you get to choose about personal responsibility and what success you really want to achieve. And so I dare you to dream, and I again go back to what I think makes our nation so important are those freedoms that we love and enjoy and the opportunities that we get to choose whether we want to succeed or fail. Thank you, and I look forward to further conversation tonight.
Thank you very much. And now we will move on to questions. The questions that you'll receive tonight have been formulated and prepared by our student panel. The first one is a question for all candidates. You have 1 to 2 minutes to respond. And again, Cece Schneider is our timer. And so, Cece, the first question, please.
Who or what from your past experience inspired you to become involved in politics? Anyone can start.
Well, thank you. I was 17 years old, and I was reading in our school newspaper, our small town. Again, I'm a fourth-generation farm kid, grew up in Arlington, South Dakota. I was actually a contributing editor of the Arlington Public Schools newspaper. Now, remember, I graduated with 25 kids, 5 boys, 20 girls, or excuse me, the other way around, 20 boys, 5 girls. And I was reading in our school newspaper that they were looking for legislative pages out in Pierre. And I called up my local legislator representing our district, or Kingsbury County at the time, which was Representative Joyce Hodges. And I said, how do I apply? Of course, you had to apply, get signed off, and a recommendation by her or that individual legislator. And so I went to Pierre. What I learned in Pierre was the citizen legislature at its truest and its finest. I was able to sit down with leaders and names that all of you recognize as a little page at 17 years old, a farm kid from Arlington, South Dakota, that I got to sit and ask Jack Rentschler, Larry Gabriel, Jim Abbott, Dave Munson, who went on to be a mayor. So these are all former Secretary of Ag, President of USD. These are all names that we recognize in the world of South Dakota's leaders. I got to ask them questions, and all the one thing that I heard back from them was say, you're driving your thirst. You need to be sitting in these chairs. And to have someone tell a 17-year-old farm kid that you should consider running for the legislature someday was so impactful, and I'm so grateful that they did that. As a 17-year-old, I still remember those words from Jack Grenchler and Jib Abbott telling me that. So that's what inspired me, was my little newspaper, printing it, publishing it, asking the question, and going to Peer, and Peer really inspired me as a citizen legislator, what it's like to sit there and impact your life 40 days a year. So thanks for giving me that opportunity to serve as your state legislator for those 10 years.
Next, we'll have Tim Bjorkman.
Thank you, Cece, for that question. I was serving on the bench here in Davison County and several of the counties in the southeastern part of South Dakota. And over the course of a decade, what struck me was that so many of the people who came in front of me with serious problems, felony charges, had been foreclosed from any access to health care. Many of them had mental illness and had turned to drugs to self-medicate. The other thing that was so striking is almost nobody I sent to prison had a high school diploma. So healthcare and education have become the great dividers in America and certainly in South Dakota. And what struck me was that the problems I saw weren't being addressed, even though there were what I thought to be common sense solutions to them. So while running for Congress wasn't on my radar a couple of years ago, it became clear to Kay and I that I couldn't just sit. I had a decade left that I could have served on the bench, but that I needed to be part of this solution because I wasn't going to be able to solve it where I was at. And it became clear to us that while the problems that we face in America, some define as economic, others as cultural and social, it's probably some of all of that. But the middle class and the lower middle classes especially are losing their access to health care. We need to have common sense solutions that get everybody paying what they can and nobody too much. Because the fundamental problem we face with health care is that it costs too much and too many are excluded. So more than anything else, that drove me into this race. Thanks.
Please hold your applause until all candidates answer the question. Dr. LaFleur.
Thank you. One of the major reasons I got involved with politics is because I've been standing on the sidelines for quite a while. And I've been doing pretty much what everyone else is doing, at least the majority of people, is I'm just complacent. I'm inside my little safe box, and I'm nice and comfortable and warm in there. And I don't go outside of my box unless something comes into my world and kind of shakes things up. And that's what we kind of have to do to a lot of the people, not only in South Dakota, but across this nation. It's like Shantel said, out of all the registered voters that came out, a small percentage of them came out to vote in the ballot. I mean, why is that? I mean, is it because they're complacent, or is it because they've been disenfranchised, or is it because they think their vote doesn't count, or their voice isn't never going to be heard? But we need to wake people up in this state and outside of this state, across the country, to the fact that we can no longer afford to be complacent. We have to get engaged in our political arena on all levels, at the state, on the county, on the local, and the municipality level, so that one of the things, so that we can reduce the tyranny and the pockets of tyranny that are existing in the world. One of my college professors, Professor Mike Roach at USD, told me, he said, the world is made up of all different sizes of choices around you, and all around you at the same time there's little pockets of tyranny. And he said, what we have to do as citizens is we have to get engaged in the world around us and not stay in our little safe box. We have to get outside of the box, we have to think outside the box, and we need to take control of our world. And by doing that, It means to get engaged in the political arena and making a difference that will count for all of the people, and encourage other people to do the same thing. Don't allow them to sit on the sidelines. If they don't have a way to get to the ballot box, drive them to the ballot box. Take them down there and show them that you care enough for them to get them engaged in the process. That's what I think is most important, and that's why I got into politics.
Next is Lora Hubbel.
How many of you, when you're in class and you know what's going on, you understand the teacher, but you know somebody beside you is real confused. But they're shy. They're not going to say anything, and they're going to go through class and they're going to be confused. How many of you here will actually raise your hand, ask the teacher a question that you know the answer to, but you're asking that question just so your friend can figure it out? I know there's some of you here that'll do that. How many of you, when you see somebody mistreating a dog, will call the authorities? How many of you, when you see a bird out of its nest, will actually stop what you're doing and put the bird back in the nest? Yep, you do. You're going to make a good politician, okay, if you can answer yes to those questions, because when you have empathy for other people, and you have the guts to stand and say something is wrong, then people will listen to you. I love my mom. She was a teacher. I love my dad. He was a geologist. I love my husband. I love pizza, not in that order, evidently. But one thing that really changed my life was the love of my children, I should say. When I first had my first child in my arms, I could not believe the magnitude of love that was inside of me. I didn't realize I had all that inside of me. Now, when they start messing with my child, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm the person that'll stop a car who's beating their dog, okay? When they start messing with my child, I will actually jump into politics. And that was my first run into politics. I ran in the school election. I did not win, but a lot of my ideas were passed on, and I do believe that I had the effect of helping that situation. And this 2 minutes go really fast, so I'm sorry I ran over, but thank you. And that's why I'm in politics, and I hope that you guys are too someday. Thank you.
Marty Jackley.
You know, I reflect back, and I would say my introduction to politics is my father was a small-town prosecutor in South Dakota, an elected state's attorney. And he actually had run unsuccessfully for Attorney General in 1986, which is why it made it so special when the court let Dad swear me in as Attorney General. And I would say the reason I'm running for governor is for the last 8 years as your Attorney General, I fought to keep you and your community safe, and now I want to fight for your future.
Next, Dusty Johnson.
First, I want to thank Lora. I was the confused kid in the back of class, so thank you for helping out. But some of you will know how I felt as a 12 or a 13-year-old walking to the corner grocery store to buy, milk or bread for my family with food stamps. And certainly those programs help a lot of people. They help my family. I understand that there's a role for our government in helping people out of tough times, but I would tell you that those experiences made me feel small, right? It's important we have those programs, but they made me feel small. I have contrasted that through 3 decades of my life since then with how I felt at 15 when I bought my first car with the money that I had earned. And that made me feel so big. It made me feel empowered. And since that time, I have been fascinated. I have been obsessed with this question about what is the right role of government in people's lives. We know that there are things that government can rightfully do for us and for people who are in tough spots. We all know, whether we're on the right or whether we're on the left, we also know that there are times when government does so many things for people that it creates a dependence, that it saps from them that burning fire that should be in all of our guts to feel big with something that we have done. The reason I have been involved in public service is because every single day I want to make decisions with that obsessive focus on what is the right balance.
Thank you very much, candidates. Our next question is directed toward the governor candidates. Please.
According to a recent state report card, South Dakota has scored remarkably low when it comes to public transparency and state government integrity. As the chief administrator of our state, what will you do to improve our transparency and state integrity?
That's a great question, and I'm a believer it's more about action than words. And when I first became Attorney General, I recognized the importance of open government and transparency, which is why Attorney General Jackley and Governor Dugard formed the task force to look into how do we improve government transparency. With that came legislation. Admittedly, it had the support of the governor and the Attorney General, but it didn't have the support necessarily of another branch of the government. Some of it passed, some of it is still out there to be moved forward. Then last year, as Attorney General, I formed another open government task force that studied what we can do in the criminal justice system. And out of it came Senate Bill 25, and it had the support of the Attorney General, and it became law. I've already openly said that when you look at government transparency, that's one of the strongest ways to fight public corruption, something that I, as Attorney General, have to prosecute. And so if I become governor, I will form another task force. If the next Attorney General is willing to do it with me, I will welcome that, but there'll be a task force to study open government and how we as a state can open things up so that the taxpayers can see what we are doing with their money and their government. Thank you.
Next, Lora Hubbel.
South Dakota does have a problem with no transparency. In fact, we are number 2, number 3, and number 8 as the most corrupt state in the nation. University of Indiana had one of the studies on that. So did Forbes magazine. So we do have a problem with covering things up. That is not going to be in my administration. We have a situation like we have in Platte, where we have the Gear Up situation. There's a lot of inconsistencies there. A lot of questions that need to be asked. That case should not be closed. That should still be open. We should still have transparency on that. The EB5 situation, we don't have transparency on that. That needs to be opened up also. If I am your governor, there will be things that will be opened up that most people want to keep under the carpet. Am I going to open up a can of worms? You betcha. We're going to get to the bottom of a lot of this corruption that's in South Dakota if I am your governor. Thank you.
Next, Dr. LaFleur.
Thank you. That was a good question. I agree with the other candidates here. The problem with transparency is it's just not transparent. We have to have full accountability. We have to have openness. We have to have a direct scope of the involvement. Anytime a state does anything, it involves a procurement process. And it requires accountability, transparency, efficiency, and cost effectiveness. It also involves being fair to all of the bidders and having an open bid situation. Sometimes the same contractors get contracts over and over and over again, whether they're just extremely lucky or there's some other power at work, we don't know. But to have open and transparency, you have to have honesty. So you got to just take it to the people. Involve the people in all aspects of the process. We don't need a task force. We don't need a special group. What we need is the people. The people are the ones who should be deciding what we are doing as a state. I mean, all of us are elected officials, of course, by our constituents, but they're their bosses. We're up there doing the job for all of you, and we should involve each and every one of you in that process. And when we talk about procurement, we're talking about big money, and that gets paid for by the taxpayers. That's you. So you should have a say in every aspect of what's going on in the state, whether it's a bridge repair or a highway repair, or tearing down an old building and putting up a new one, or levying taxation or raising property taxes, whatever the case may be. Nothing should ever be done without the consensus of the voters, and that's you individual folks here tonight and the rest of you across the state. So we just roll it out to you and just pure honesty. Here it is. This is what we're going to do. We need your input. We need to know what you want to do with it too. That's how you get around accountability and transparency. You just open the doors and let everyone see what's going on. Thank you.
Our next question is for the U.S. House candidates, and we will start with Tim Bjorkman. Question, please.
Can you name one area where you believe you may need to oppose the leadership of your current party? I can repeat that. I think the microphone was a little mixed up. Can you name one area where you believe you may need to oppose the leadership of your current party?
I could probably name several, actually. Thank you for that question. I have a fundamentally different view from the National Party on the issue of abortion. As I mentioned, I think abortion and our failure to protect vulnerable life after birth are two sides of the same problem, and it's very damaging to the fiber of this country. I think we need to work on caring for women to make abortion as rare as possible while it is legal, and caring for the children to give hope to those people who are carrying those children to make sure that they have safe and productive lives that give them a fair shot at the American dream. So that's one. I don't know that the National Party supports this, but I do. I support term limits. I just think that it's not healthy to have people who've been in office 20, 30, or 40 years. I don't think that necessarily makes them more responsive to the people. I think that one of the things that the Founding Fathers envisioned for our country was that we would have servants who would set aside the plow for a season and go to Washington to service, and then return to be part of the governed. And I think we've lost track of that. We've got career politicians. It hasn't served us well, and it's plugging up the pipeline for youth and vigor and new ideas to come in. So those are two of the big areas that I think probably I part ways with my party on. I also support a balanced budget amendment. That's a third one. I think $20 trillion as a load around all of our future generations is just too much, and we have to have sound policy to turn that around. Thank you.
Next, Shantel Krebs.
When you ask me about my own party and its beliefs, let me just talk about what I had to do in this particular situation when I ran for Secretary of State. I had to take on my own party because of what was going on in the Secretary of State's office. A sitting Republican was in that office, and that office was in disarray, and something had to be done. So I took on my own party to clean up the mess that I encountered. I walked into a mess 3 years ago. So first of all, taking on your own party is the first step, which I did. The second part that I think we all can agree on in this room and that we're all frustrated about is why can't Republicans work across the party and work across the lines and party lines and across the aisle? That's what we've done, and I've done as a legislator. As the first Republican woman to chair the Senate Ag Committee, the votes in Republican Ag Committee, or an Ag Committee, is not Republican or Democrat. It's typically East River versus West River issues. You work together. Right now, the Republican Party doesn't necessarily want to reach out across the aisle and work across that aisle. And I firmly believe that if you're going to change the way things are done in Washington, D.C., you have to work together. And that's what South Dakotans, you've all said that across the state over and over. Why can't they just work together? So you're, as a Republican, going to Washington, D.C., working together, I think, is the most important thing, in reaching out across the aisle to do so.
Dusty Johnson.
Well, first I would mention a concept, and then I'll mention a couple of specific issues. But the concept would be, in general, I think folks in Washington, including the Republicans, are uncomfortable making hard decisions. It's a little bit easier to kick the can down the road, and I don't think that served our country well, and so one specific issue that would come from that would be my support of term limits. I used to be opposed to term limits. I used to think, why would you deny me the freedom to be able to select the candidate of my choice? But I think there is enough dysfunction in Washington, D.C. right now that we do need some extraordinary policy measures in place. Other specific issues would be international trade. Our president does not seem to be a very big fan of trade with other countries, but I would just tell you that when you've got a willing buyer and a willing seller, by definition, their lives are both enriched through that transaction. And to have government get in between that and stop or hinder that makes me pretty uncomfortable, particularly when you're in an ag state. We have an opportunity to feed the world, and we are not going to be able to get that done, even with our incredible technology and our incredible know-how, if we don't have access to markets. We will deny South Dakota producers the opportunity to benefit from those trades if we don't let them happen. Now, one other thing that I would mention is, I think, the general coarseness of discourse in Washington. Republicans say a lot of nasty things about one another, and they say a lot of nasty things about Democrats. I do not think we should go along to get along, but I do think we have to get back to disagreeing in a way that's respectful. I think to do anything else is, I think it's un-American.
Thank you very much. Our next three questions will go to all candidates. And we'll start this time with Dr. LaFleur. Question, please.
What is your current perception of our education system, and what are your priorities when it comes to education?
That's a very, very good question. I've been saying since the beginning of my campaign that we need to repeal Common Core. We need to bring back the 3 R's. I don't know why they call it the 3 R's, because it's called reading, writing, and arithmetic, and arithmetic starts with an A. But we're going to call it the 3 R's, because that's what they called it when I was in school. We need to have a top-to-down priority on education, and that means the little pockets of tyranny that I was telling you about earlier, those exist at the local level, and they actually exist within the city governments themselves, and the city governments many times don't have control or say-so over the school districts within the city itself. For example, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The Sioux Falls School District inside of Sioux Falls, South Dakota doesn't encompass the entire city of Sioux Falls. It crosses over into other school districts lines like Harrisburg and T, and you go north and west and east, and you'll cross over the Sioux Falls School District boundaries and go into another school district. It's demarcated by lines that they previously set up. But the local school boards have a pretty much free reign over what they do. As you recall, a couple of years ago, the state legislature raised the sales tax by ½ a penny, which in essence is 1 penny. There is no such thing as a ½ cent tax increase. So what we tried to do a few months ago, earlier this summer, was we tried to get a special election initiative put on a special election ballot for later of this year, probably in October. Probably would be going on right now if we were successful. But the city of Sioux Falls School District raised the property taxes by going back on their promise to the state legislature. They agreed that they would not raise the school or the property taxes in Sioux Falls within the school district for 10 years. And they wanted to opt out on that. Now, they have no problem sending a little postcard to your mailbox.
Next, Tim Bjorkman.
Well, thanks for that question. Let me start out with this. South Dakota has the greatest gap in high school graduation rates of any state in the nation between well-off kids and poor kids. That's thing one. Thing two, college costs too much. Now, those are largely state problems, but they have a federal component to them. Our state supports colleges and college students at a far lower rate than most states around us. And our state's college tuition costs have zoomed over the last 6 years. But the fact that we're not graduating poor kids is very troubling to me, because I know that 2/3 of the people in our state prison today don't have a high school diploma. And if someone in our prison, in our state, gets so much as a 2-year degree, the chance of that person ending up in prison is extremely remote. Less than, I think, 1% of the prison population has a 2-year degree even. All right, we're one of the few states that don't have quality, I should say, quality pre-K for poor kids. We've made a decision in this state that if your parents don't have money, you don't have the right to a fair shot at school, and you don't have the right to start school at relatively the same point as every other kid in your class. And I saw those kids fall further and further behind in the educational system until they eventually fell out of school altogether and into the court system in front of people like me. So I stand for quality pre-K. If the state won't pay for it, we need to have a federal program that has a $7 to 1 return on investments. And like to hear my fellow candidates' take on that, why those kids who grow up in poor homes don't have the same right as mine or theirs to have a chance at a decent education. Thank you.
Next, Shantel Krebs.
When listening to our constituents across the state, the one comment or the feedback that I hear consistently in rural areas, in small towns, in larger cities across South Dakota is the need for workforce. Our employers and our businesses are needing workers. So that goes back to the funding and needs in our school systems, specifically career and technical education. So skilled labor, apprenticeship-like programs. We as a legislature, I co-sponsored a piece of legislation that actually funded CTE, what we call that, or career and tech education funding, specifically back to the local school districts to develop those programs in these small school districts, rural school districts, and larger school districts. That was in 2008. That funding was used up, the money was used up, and the state did not continue to fund it. I would suggest investing and specifically targeting and letting that local school board decide what they need that money for, and specifically in workforce needs in that area, whether it be a welder, like right here in Mitchell or in Yankton, we need welders, we need electricians, we need plumbers. Develop those skilled laborers and teach those apprenticeship programs in our school systems so those kids that do not want to go to college can go right into a good paying job and start their little businesses right in these communities in rural South Dakota.
Next, Dusty Johnson.
First, I know at some point you may start to trickle out, so when I'm done with my answer, I'll put a piece of notepaper back on that table next to the not quite ravishingly handsome cardboard cutout back there. And if as you leave you have a question that you want to ask me but don't have time, write down your number and I'll call you afterwards. Or if you want to volunteer or in some other way get connected with me, please do that. I'll have that notepad back there. So with regard to education, I suspect this won't be a very popular answer, but I think we need a lot more rigor than we have. It's not popular because already as a parent of 3 boys, I understand how much homework they have on any given night. But I have to tell you, we are increasingly moving toward a knowledge-based economy. And people who have skills will have a good life, and people who do not will really struggle to realize that good life. And if we deny our students real rigor to help them build that knowledge base, they're going to find it hard to be able to make their way in this world, earning the kind of money that people need to be able to earn to pay, to make ends meet.
Marty Jackley.
Obviously, with a 6th grader and an 8th grader, education is extremely important to me. You know, I mentioned earlier I grew up with a teacher. My sister's a teacher. I would say this: we have great teachers. We have great schools in South Dakota. We have great technical schools, and we have great universities. I'm standing in one right now. But there's things we can do better. Things we can do better by making sure we continue to recognize that many federal standards that come from Washington, such as Common Core, aren't necessarily right for us. That peer can make decisions better than Washington, and local school boards, for the most part, can make decisions better than peer. And we need to keep an eye on that. There's things that a governor can do. Promote and support opportunity scholarships. Promote and support Dakota Core. Promote and support basically JAG, Jobs for America graduates. I serve on that with 10 governors and 1 loud attorney general. There's things we can do better, and there's things we are doing better. But overall, we have great education in South Dakota, and don't let anybody else tell you different. Thank you.
Lora Hubbel.
Thank you. Obamacare is to Common Core because they're both, okay, Obamacare is to health as Common Core is to education. Both of them are top-down, you do it my way or the highway from the feds, telling us local school boards what to do and how to do it. One of their buzzwords is rigor. I don't know if you knew that, Dusty, but they're not talking vigor, they're talking rigor. You realize rigor is the root word of rigor mortis, okay? We're telling, the rigor that they're talking about in Common Core means you do this, you fit in this box, and that's where we want you to stay. That's why I don't like Common Core one bit, because you do not determine your own destiny in Common Core. It is determined for you. When I said earlier, people are in the market to take that away from you, because they don't want your brilliance in the work spot. They want their brilliance in the work spot. So they want to make sure that you are their workers and not their equal. I want you guys to be their equal. I want South Dakota to be probably the most advanced educationally in the nation. I want us to be examples where we can actually have the best education system without Common Core in the nation. That's one of my problems with this issue, is that your local school boards will be null and void, basically. They are being told what to do and how to do it. That is not something that, you know, we talked about a great nation. That's what totalitarian nations do. That is not what great nations do. South Dakota is now a governing state for Common Core. That means we don't just participate in Common Core. We govern it. We are on the front lines of Common Core. That needs to be brought back. The same way with Obamacare. We are the 3rd most Obamacare compliant state in the nation, and we are a governing state for Common Core. We need to draw that back. Thank you.
Shall we go to our final question? 2 more? Very good, let's do that.
Okay, this question is also for all candidates. Many of you have mentioned faith in your opening What Makes a Nation Great answers. So could you please tell us about how faith makes an impact in your decision making? And also, do you believe faith has a role in state government decisions? And if so, what is that role?
Tim Bjorkman.
Thanks for that. Well, my faith is at the heart of every decision that I make. If it's not, I try to make it that. So it's integral to my life. But I will say that it's a very common thing for us to hear today in American politics and state politics. And I think of the passage that you will know them by the fruit they bear. And so while a lot of people talk about the role of their faith, I think that actions speak louder than words, and we should be very circumspect when we listen to people comment about whether it's me or anybody else about the role of faith in our lives. Now, we are a nation of separation of church and state. Almost everybody here had family who came here because they were dissenters from where they came from. My earliest forebears here were Puritans who came in about 1638. They were objectors to the Church of England. They were in the same church as Shakespeare. And they, along with others, came to this country, Stratford-on-Avon first, and then eventually to Long Island, because they wanted to have freedom to worship as they believed. And so while everyone's faith in this country is protected, no one's faith should be established in government. And so I think that it's also very important that we keep those things in mind. We are a nation free to worship or not worship as we believe, and that's the essence of freedom in America. Thanks.
Shantel Krebs.
I start every morning with the morning walk, and I start out with Psalm 118:24. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. That gives me my start of the day in a positive attitude, but truly faith, when you ask the word faith in my decision making and its role in government, faith to me is my moral compass. As a legislator for 10 years, I voted on issues that I support because of my faith. Whether it be my pro-life legislation that I sponsored, my 20 votes for pro-life and support for pro-life legislation, whether it be co-sponsoring the marriage amendment and the definition between a man and a woman is defined in our Constitution as marriage. Faith, every morning for me, is my moral compass. I also believe faith practices and keeps me in restraint. So yes, I do think it has its role, because in our founding documents, how many of our founding documents, the word creator is in them? Our rights are given to us by God, not government.
Dusty Johnson.
So I am told that the particularly Orthodox Hasidic Jews carried 2 slips of paper with them, one in each pocket. And in the right pocket, the slip of paper says that for you, the whole universe was created. And in the left pocket, the paper says, you are nothing but dust. Of course, we're talking about Hasidic Jews there, but that's also sort of a tense dichotomy that also exists in my faith background, in my faith beliefs. It's something Lora mentioned, the state motto, which I absolutely love, which is under God the people rule. And those sort of state of, I mean, on one hand, the whole universe was created for us. You are so powerful as individuals. You have in this, republic, you have an opportunity to make massive impacts in people's lives for better or for worse. You have incredible power. And yet, you're nothing but dust, right? Under God, the people rule. The people rule, but it's under God. And if you only have the arrogance that comes with believing the whole universe was created for you, you're going to make terrible decisions, because you won't be a servant leader. You won't have that humility that comes with real leadership. And that's why I think the second piece of paper is even more important than the first. An acknowledgement that we are flawed, that we at times need to quiet our minds and understand that we are not the font of all knowledge, and that maybe if we stop talking for a little bit and listen and pray and meditate, that we can find answers that will be better than we would have come up with on our own. And for me, faith plays a real role in reminding me of that on a daily basis.
Marty Jackley.
When I first became Attorney General, an Assistant Attorney General, John, walked into my office and he handed me the Bible. And he said, Marty, you look around this office, there are a lot of law books, but they may not necessarily answer every challenging question you're going to have as Attorney General, and you'll need this. I will tell you that my faith and my core values have guided me through a lot of very challenging solutions and issues as your Attorney General. They're important to me, and they'll guide me through being your governor if you give me that honor. Thank you.
Lora Hubbel.
Thank you. Back in the early 80s, it was when the pro-life movement was starting to get a headway, and I was kind of new to it, and I I remember hearing a little bit about it, and I remember praying about it, and I said, God, am I supposed to do something about this? Is this important to you? I didn't fully understand the whole science behind it, because back then they just thought it was a blob of tissue, and I hadn't fully, researched that yet. And so I said, God, show me. Just show me what you mean. Am I supposed to get involved in this? And so I opened the Bible, and instantly the first thing I read was Proverbs 24:12, I believe. And it said, rescue those who are perishing. Stop those who are being sentenced unjustly to death. And it goes on further. It says, if you pretend like you don't know, God knows your heart, and he knows that you knew. So I figured, okay, I guess that's a pretty strong answer. I didn't even know that verse was in the Bible. And so that's how my faith guided me through the pro-life involvement. Another issue, politically, I did the same thing. I didn't know, was it a long time ago, was it legal or was it ethical for a black person to marry a white person? And the churches had different ideas back then. And I said, God, I don't care what the church says. I want to know what you say. Is it legal? Is it ethical? And instantly I opened the Bible, and it showed me the story of Moses. And Moses married a Cushite lady. Now, if you know the Cushites were very black race. And his sister, Miriam, she actually was, upset about this marriage. And so God turned her completely white with leprosy. So the story showed me that, yes, God is fine with interracial marriages. That's how my faith is used. And when I have questions, I just go to God. I believe I am a God-fearing person, which means if you fear God, you don't have to fear men or women, who are scarier, by the way. So you just basically, when you face God that day, you will be told if you did well, and you will give an account for everything you've done. That's what I fear, and that keeps my faith strong.
Dr. LaFleur.
Thank you. That's also a very good question. I'm a born-again Christian. In 1980, my mother passed away from incurable medical conditions. Doctors couldn't do anything for her. They performed emergency surgery, and they opened her up, and they said, no, we're just sutured her back up, and we're going to make her as comfortable as we can, but the time is near. So I was lost. I mean, I took care of my mother for the first 24 years. Well, she took care of me for the first 18 years of my life, but I took care of her until I was 24. I was the youngest of 10 children, the last one to leave home. And she encouraged me at all times to go out and find someone, my life's mate, and have children. And I kept telling her, no. You took care of me. When Dad left, I was 3 years old. You took care of me and 8 or 7 of my other siblings who were still at home. You could have walked away from us just like our father did, but you didn't do that. So I'm not going to do that to you. And I stayed by her side until the day she died. But when I found Jesus, when I became a born-again Christian, I found salvation in the Lord. I've read the Bible, and I've gone through law school like Mr. Jackley has, and also the judge that's sitting here. We all know the law, some of us more than others, but assuredly, we use God as our guidance. Before the Constitution was written by our forefathers, the Bible was our guiding light. And I always believed that if we could live by the 10 Commandments, we wouldn't need police, we wouldn't need lawyers, we wouldn't need judges, and we wouldn't need armies. All we would need is God and each other. So we need to go back to that. And I affirm in some parts, and I dissent in others. We need God in our state government. God needs to be back in our state government, back in our schools, and back in our lives. And we need to get back to that as a people.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to our closing question.
What advice would you give some of us students interested in getting involved in politics?
Shantel Krebs.
Listen. Be open to ideas. Take on your own party. Stand up. Educate yourselves. Educate yourselves on the issues that is affecting you in your everyday. educate yourselves on the candidates like you are here tonight. But I think the best advice I was given when I was sitting in there as a legislative page when I was 17 was Alice Kundert, who was, of course, a Secretary of State, ran for governor, and I follow in those footsteps as her Secretary of State. She told me, "You're not a good legislator if you don't go back and you go out in the public and listen to your constituents." So listening was the best skill that I could have given. So listen and then take action.
Dusty Johnson.
I hate to wax too poetic, but whenever I feel not up to the task, or like it would just be easier to sit down and be quiet, I think of that poem where the refrain is, you know, rage, rage against the dawning of the night, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And there will be so many times in your life when it's just going to be a lot easier to sit down and be quiet. Or when you think it'll be somebody else's job, or when you think, let's just turn on Netflix and we'll veg out. Because hard work is a pain. To be impactful, to live a life of consequence is uncomfortable. It requires you to rage, not in an angry way, but in a joyous way, to rage against the pockets of tyranny we've talked about tonight, and to rage towards something better for humankind. And to me, the biggest difference between those people in my life who I have seen filled with joy and those who appear to be just biding their time until their years on this planet are done is that the first type of people are in all ways and in all things willing to rage. As happy warriors, they take on what they know is not just. They work hard, whether it's at the community level or at the state level or at the club level or at the church level. They are willing to rage. And I hope with all my heart that no matter who you support up on this stage here tonight, that you support at least one of us, and that you're willing to rage against the dying of the light.
Marty Jackley.
Great question. I'd have to say, listen and dare to dream. And that dare to dream is important. You're going to have a lot of choices and chances in your life. Whether it's politics or otherwise, don't let them pass you by. You know, when I was 35 years old, a lot of people said you're never going to be a U.S. attorney for a lot of reasons, and I dared to dream. When I first started to look to be the chairman of the nation's attorney generals, I'm from a small state. I heard a lot of excuses why it wouldn't work, and I dared to dream. So whatever it is in life, whether it's politics or otherwise, always be prepared to listen and dare to dream and carry through with those dreams. Thank you for a great evening tonight.
Lora Hubbel.
In the news recently, we read of a Harvey Weinstein, and he got by with a lot of illegal activity. Why? Because nobody said anything. Jane Fonda said, "I didn't think it was my place to say anything." Are you like that? You're in college. You know the scientific experiment where they put a man behind a curtain, and they said that they were going to increase the electrical stimulation on this man or this victim until he almost passed out. Now they were told that they weren't really going to hurt this person. Now the students heard the man screaming and screaming and screaming, and they were assured, "Oh, he's okay, he's okay." And they were told how many voltage that he was getting. Now very few people stopped it. Very few people stopped the experiment. Most people just let the man get an electrical shock that would have killed him, but it was just an experiment. Don't be that person. Don't be those people, I should say, that doesn't do anything. My husband and I go round and round. He thinks he's superior because he's apolitical rather than political, as if that's better than being political. And I tell him that's like a fish saying they don't care about water. Politics affect everything you do. Not to be extreme, but how you tie your shoes. Politics affect. So it is your responsibility as a human, to the human race, to yourself, to others, that when you see something wrong, when you see something that could be better, that you need to jump you need to jump up and do something about that. I encourage you, since you're here, you guys are probably have that bent in you that you want to help people, that you want to make things better, and I would just encourage you to follow that bent. If somebody tries to discourage you, just let it roll right off your back. Just keep going. Have that passion, have that rage like Dusty was talking about, to do something. The only people that fail are the people who quit. Don't quit.
Dr. LaFleur.
Another good question. I'm going to take little bits and pieces from all of our candidates here tonight because they all have some wisdom. We all do. Some of us mentioned moral compass. That's important. Some of us mentioned not being complacent. That's also important. We need to become engaged. That's a very big issue here. Step outside that comfort zone that we're so used to being in. Go out and talk to people. Go talk to elderly people. Go talk to minority people. Just communicate with your neighbor. Communicate with your friends. Be a good Christian 24/7 to yourselves and to all of your neighbors. That's what's going to help you get through life. The bridges you build are the same bridges you're going to have to cross back over in bad times. But if you burn the bridges after you've crossed them, you have no way of getting back. So get back to religion, get back to your faith, and get back to your fellow man. Engage with the people around you. Don't stick your head in the sand and become an ostrich, because the world's going on around us. It doesn't stop. And if you just ignore it, it's going to creep up on you someday, and you're not going to like the results. So you've got to get out there, and you've got to do what you need to do as a citizen at all times. Be a good Christian, be a good citizen, and get involved in your politics within your state at any level. It's so important. Just do the job that God gave us the chance to do, and be a good neighbor and be a good Christian. And you'll find out that your life is going to be highly successful. You'll achieve the goals that you set for yourself at every single step in your life. You're young, I'm old, but you can make a difference. I tried to. I came back after years of being out in the private and public sector. I started my undergrad at 34, and I went through my undergrad, started my master's, and went through law school. And you're never too young. You're never too old. In my graduating class, we had one lady who was 84 years old, and she graduated from law school. So you're not too young. Just keep doing it.
Tim Bjorkman.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight, for all the great questions that you've asked. It's been my honor to be here with you. Let me just share these thoughts in answer to that question. I think asking ourselves first, what's the motivation for politics? If your motivation is that you seek to be a servant of others, that you seek to be a problem solver, to bring people together to solve our problems collectively, then that is a good start. The next thing that I would suggest is be willing to speak truth to power. Because you know what? We don't need more inauthenticity in politics. We've got our quota of that. There's a lot of artificiality. And the third thing is, do you care more about helping people solve problems than a political career? Because if your only drive or motivation is what's in it for you, it's going to end up being very frustrating for you, and you're not going to be the servant that the people want. If you can answer yes to those questions, then I would really encourage you to commit your life to that and follow your dream. Thank you.
Candidates, thank you as well. Let's have a nice round of applause for our candidates.
Thank you again to each of our candidates and our guest speakers here today for coming to visit with us and also for dealing with our time constraints. We appreciate your graciousness in that. I also want to thank our student panel, and JP Skelly for facilitating for us today. At this time, I'm going to invite our candidates and the student panel to be dismissed. Go ahead and leave the stage and head to your designated reception tables that we have set up for you in the back of the room or the hallway there. And while they're all headed that way, I just wanted to announce to all of you and let you know about 2 events that we have coming up being hosted by the McGovern Center. The first is our annual Hunger Summit. It's the South Dakota Hunger Summit, and that summit is being held here in the Sherman Center on November 8th, starting at 9:30 a.m. Our keynote speaker this year is MJ Altman, and she works for the World Food Program USA. We'll also have our Empty Bowls Luncheon, which is hosted by our very own Mitchell High School. So we invite all of you to come and attend the Hunger Summit. Registration is not required, but if you'd like to register or you'd like more information, you can go to partnersagainsthunger.org or see us out in the lobby for some more information. On January 15th, we're hosting our first ever McGovern Center Living the Legacy Gala. This semi-formal dinner event is a great way to learn more about the legacy of George and Eleanor McGovern, but also about what we do at the McGovern Center and getting involved there. Our keynote speaker for that evening will be Mark Lemke, and he is the author of My Brother's Keeper, George McGovern and Progressive Christianity. It's a fascinating book, and I would encourage you all to learn more about the gala. If you're interested in tickets, you can speak to myself or get some more information out in the hallway. So as we move on to the reception time, you'll notice that each candidate is stationed either here in the back of the Sherman Center or out in the hallway at various tables. If you're a Dakota Wesleyan student, make sure that you've grabbed a punch card from the sign-in table. You're eligible to win a prize if you visit each of the booths. You can turn your cards in at the info booth once they're all filled in as well. With all of that, thank you to each and every one of you for coming, and we encourage you to stick around for the reception time. Thanks again for your engagement and for being here tonight.